Welcome back to Learning to Fly. We are here together as we move into our 5th episode. And this evening's episode, we are moving into the realm of cycles, where we get to explore more of that circular nature of what life is about. So tonight with our cycles, we're going to be exploring a couple of pieces of what it means inside of us to start looking at our relationship with the many different aspects and arenas of life. That circular nature of how we do what we do, why we do what we do, where we get stuck doing what we don't want to be doing, and how we want to change it so that we can start thriving.
I just had this image of using the word cycle to tell us that we're stuck in a spin cycle.
Yes.
I think of how fast things move in the washing machine when they're on spin.
Yes.
We can feel that way in our lives when we're just spinning around, chasing our tails, caught in a cycle, a pattern of futility and frustration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And how challenging it can be to see beyond that. So as we start exploring the world of cycles tonight, let's just take a deep breath and just let the air move in through your nose and filter down. Softly rest on this image of this tree trunk, looking at all those circles and wondering whether the circles start from the inside and move out, or from the outside and move inward. Or perhaps it's both, the inhale and the exhale of this circular image. And as you do that, we're just going to explore for a moment a breathing technique that begins with the inhale, counting to 4 as you inhale through the nose. And then just pausing in that inhale and just exploring and letting that breath sit inside, also for the count of 4, before you're ready to release the breath. And as you release, I invite you to make some sound. To the count of 4. And then very often we want to jump straight back into the inhale again. And I'm going to encourage you to just pause as you are empty in your lungs here, again, for the count of 4. And so we use this count of 4 in the way of making our determination to breathe ourselves into the cyclical nature of life. Just breathing in, pausing, breathing out, and letting all that old stale air release itself from your lungs as you continue to empty your cup, empty your body, empty your mind. Just gazing softly into this circular image of the tree, growing to the light, evolving, moving, shifting, changing. Expanding your attention and your awareness back to your breath and letting your body fill itself up. Letting that breath sit inside of you and giving it some time to truly oxygenate all those organs inside of your torso before you release the breath, letting it out with some sound and some movement. Even the vibration of sound moving through our vocal cords opens the space to let go, letting go of stress, tension, worry, concern, distraction, and pausing yet again in that emptiness before you welcome the breath. And so I invite you to keep letting this natural breath and movement and flow happen as we open the door to the great medicine wheel of life. The great medicine wheel of life. I can't help but be reminded of the Lion King and the story of the circle of life. I'm going to read the words that were written by Elton John and Tim Rice as we open our eyes, open our hearts, open our minds to this continued series of events that continue to happen in our lives. From the day we arrive on the planet and blinking, step into the sun, there's more to see than can ever be seen, more to do than can ever be done. There's far too much to take in here, more to find than can ever be found. But the sun rolling high through the sapphire sky keeps great and small on the endless round. It's the circle of life, and it moves us all through despair and hope, through faith and love, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. These words speak of that great medicine wheel of life, don't they? I kind of want to burst into song as I read them. When we look to the definition of cycles, we find that it comes from the Latin word, I probably don't pronounce it correctly, but cyclus. Cyclus, or the Greek word, kuklos. And this simply means the circle. Tonight, we're going to be opening the door to another wheel, a wheel called the Star Maiden Circle. And it speaks to us no differently than when we look to nature and we look to the cycles of nitrogen and carbon, and even the water cycle that moves things around in the cyclical nature again and again. And yet, even though we may look at it from an external position, thinking that it's always the same, it never is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think about weather patterns and how, as I get older, I hear myself and notice how many other people say, oh, the summers aren't like they used to be, and the winters are different, and not recognizing that the pattern of seasons is a cycle, and yet it's not a perfect movement that we can precisely measure and contain. That on the equinox and on the solstice is the exact transition. So on that day, that one season officially ends and has to stop interfering with the next season.
It's a very linear approach, isn't it? One that humans tend to look at, which takes us
winter's early, summer's late.
Because it should be happening on the 21st of December. It's amazing how quickly and easily we can be taken out of those natural cycles, and we tend to get caught in how it should be as opposed to how it is.
Part of what keeps us stuck in that spin cycle I was joking about earlier, that it's a choice whether we want to stay in that spin cycle or not. And when we're in it, we don't realize we have a choice. And tonight's teaching is to inform us and instruct us, but also to reveal to us other options, other possibilities, to be able to identify for ourselves where is it we do get stuck in that pattern and that cycle and feel like we can't get out. But then by applying what we're going to share with you tonight, that you can shift out of it through becoming aware. Oh, I'm in a spin. Okay, let me try this and see if it helps me out of it. Right? The goal isn't that to ensure that we never go into a spin. It's more what do you do when you happen to fall in there? Because we're not perfect. And we easily get triggered. We easily become unaware and react and end up there. And then oftentimes we've been in there for a while before we realize there's another option. So tonight's going to be about the other options.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And often when we get caught in that, we end up playing out like a little child. You know, and that's often what prevents us from being able to step into maturity and see beyond those childish patterns. And all we want to do is throw our toys out of the cot and act out.
Yeah, and we feel justified when we do it.
Yes, yes. So the Star Maiden Circle is a teaching that the Twisted Hairs say comes from the stars, from the Pleiades. It's called the Star Maiden Circle because it comes from the Squanesi, the Star Nation beings. And it helps us to see beyond the human experience that we tend to get caught up in. And those blocks to our maturity also tend to find their way in, as we were just saying, you know, getting caught in the grind and in the spin and playing out. And so these blocks to maturity that we add into the Star Maiden Circle are really good identifiers for us. If we want to catch ourselves and become more aware, which again, when we started our Learning to Fly teachings was about awareness, if we want to become more aware, we want to look to the block when it plays up. It's a good way of identifying that we're in a dysfunctional pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
And that's when we can become the stalkers of our warrior, of the one inside who's willing to do the internal battle against our own conflict and stand up stronger than before.
It's a really funny, foolish, and silly game we play with ourselves. We often recognize when we're stuck in a pattern that we are stubbornly unwilling to get out of, even if we know that we can, if we choose to.
I know that happens to me sometimes.
Right.
I can see a little bit further beyond, but it's still comfortable to sit in that wallowing.
Sometimes it's because you haven't punished the other person enough.
Yes.
Or you're not finished punishing yourself.
Right. Right. Well, here we are ready to look at the Star Maiden Circle. And as before in some of the previous Learning to Fly teachings, most of our work is done on a wheel. We use the wheel to be able to identify the different aspects that we can start working with within ourselves. Tonight's wheel, we're going to start looking in the southeast. And this is where we find the concepts of ourself. It's a good place to start because this is where we find ourselves. And we do know that no matter where we go, there we are.
That's right. Me, myself, and I, all three of us together. But everything is about us. Our reality is of our own making. It's of our own perception. Therefore, if we can't look at ourselves first, we don't have the initiative and motivation nor the skill to trust that we can actually fly. Because if our concepts of self are low, I don't feel I am worthy enough, capable enough, whatever enough, then I'm going to keep sitting on that branch, watching all the other birds learning how to fly. Well, I just wander from the branch to the nest and back again.
Yeah. Hoping that somebody's going to bring me some food so I can continue to survive.
Right. Eventually, you get too fat and the branch breaks. And then you have no choice but to fly. And doesn't life feel like that sometimes? Absolutely. Where it's as if that branch has been pulled out from under us and all there is below us is air and then the ground. And we better figure out what we're going to do. Because when we go crashing down, it can take It can feel debilitating and make us feel like it's not worth getting up again. Yeah.
Yes. So this is also the place on the wheel from which we see, know, think, feel, and understand ourselves. And in that relationship with ourselves, that becomes how it is that we see the world. So as you were saying, those low concepts of ourselves, if I'm lacking in confidence or esteem or courage or ability, or even if I believe that I am, I'm going to see those things in the reflections in the world around me.
Yeah. If I'm haunted by monsters, that's all I'm going to see. Conversely, though, if I do have, we don't always have those moments of darkness. We have plenty of moments where we feel good about ourselves. And when we do, life feels positive. The world starts to feel like a more comfortable, safe place to be in, as opposed to that fearful need to retreat, because we see the world as something that is threatening or unsafe.
Yes. And I think it's valuable to remember that as we continue exploring around the Star Maiden Circle wheel, that in each direction we have to look at the light side and the dark side in order to get a sense of what it's about. The paradox of life. Because as you're saying, there is plenty of beauty and there is plenty of power. And there are plenty magical moments where we can really seat ourselves in who we know ourselves to be. But equally to that, we also want to be able to pay attention to the places where we're not seated in ourselves. So in every direction of the wheel, there are always going to be the light side mirrors and the dark side mirrors.
Right.
And in these teachings, in this concept of learning to fly, we want to be able to be present and honest enough with ourselves to identify the places where we're playing out the shadow or the dark side in order to be able to see our way through. Because as the little bird, it doesn't need to look at the ways in which it can fly, or the ways in which it can feed itself, or the ways in which it can sit on the branch happily singing its beautiful tune. It's the places where it needs to refine its abilities that it needs to pay attention. And the same thing happens with us as humans.
Right. And in that refinement is the awareness of what makes us choose one over the other. What makes us choose to feel low in our concept of self? And at other times, what makes us choose to feel good in our concept of self? And shall we talk about what it is that causes that?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. We have it in capital letters and in bright red as the block to our maturity.
Fear, a humorous acronym, and it means false evidence appearing real. I find that to be an accurate description of what fear actually is. That fear of what if, that fear of the unknown, where we have no evidence to prove that that fear is valid. It is a false perception that we carry about something. And that falseness is simply because we don't know what's on the other side. Fearing the unknown is terrifying. We don't feel good in our concepts. We're definitely going to be less inclined to say, yeah, I'm going to try that. Sure. It scares the shit out of me, but
I'm willing.
Right? When we do feel good about ourselves, though, we are willing to push that boundary of fear more than normal. And life starts to feel more full and more exhilarating, more satisfying.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
But it's also valuable to be able to recognize that when fear comes up inside, even if it's something that isn't a proven or an unknown outside of us, and it may be the illusion, it still feels very real.
Mm-hmm.
And that seats itself in how we feel about ourselves, and then how we hold ourselves back from how we engage with the world around us,
Yeah.
and see the world.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how to battle against fear. Even though making it a battle will typically make fear look like it's even bigger than it actually is. The way we do it is, the first thing we have to do is change our attitude. Or you could say, first assess your attitude and see if you can change it.
Yes.
Or see if it needs changing. Doesn't always mean we need to change our attitude. We might have an attitude that's appropriate for what we're doing, maybe just how we're fine-tuning that attitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if there's any sense of fear within our attitude towards something, that's going to hold us back as well and shut us down.
Right.
Yeah. And the one way to get a good assessment of attitude is if we are feeling that fear, because that word in bright red, that block, is the way of identifying when we're out of alignment. Yeah. And if we can identify that there is fear present within us, that breathing that we started off with is always a good way of seating ourselves back into our being the driver's seat of our own life.
Mm-hmm. Another technique that works for me is that I use fear as a warning bell. When I feel that fear coming up, I take on the attitude of saying to myself, okay, so there's something here, or something lurking in my presence that I don't know about, and it's making me feel afraid. In other words, this is something that is worth looking at.
Yes, it's an opportunity.
Exactly.
An opportunity for self-growth.
Yeah.
Yes. Awareness.
You could say it's an arrow saying, go this way. Look here.
Right.
Instead of, don't go here, stay out.
Exactly. Shutting down the doors and keeping ourselves small and insecure. Right. And the receptivity that we can foster inside of ourselves to be more aware of that attitude that we choose to take, then naturally informs the approach. If I can change my attitude, if I can see that there is a different way in which I can look at the situation, it automatically opens the space for me taking action in a different way, that I can approach the situation in a different way from a different perspective.
Right. And it includes that willingness to learn from what doesn't work.
Yes.
I tried it this way, didn't quite get the result I was looking for, but needs tweaking.
Right. Instead of beating ourselves up about it, because when we make a mistake and we're afraid that we're going to look stupid or look like we're incapable, immediately we start beating ourselves up, which only adds to the negative or shadow side of our concepts of self, and then shuts our worldview down.
Absolutely.
So we can see how these three energies play together. And as the warriors attribute those words in green, those really are the ways in which we can choose to become the internal warrior of our own dark shadows, to be able to crack open and spread our wings and let the branch grow. Let's move to the south, and this is where we find mythology and entertainment. You want to go?
No, you're doing great. I'm enjoying listening to
you. So here in the south is where we find the place of our child. And as children, when things happen to us, we often create stories about them. And as we grow older and older, we add, when we revisit those stories of being a child, we add more detail, and we hone, and we create a whole myth that is usually very far-fetched from the truth of the original incident or the original experience.
I want to say something about that, though. When we believe the myth to be true is when we get caught up in that issue you're talking about. But the myth itself can be empowering, it can be uplifting. Think of the stories, the legends, Hercules, Ulysses, Pocahontas, these mythologies, these stories that speak about heroism and the ability to overcome evil. That evil is that lack of self-love.
And I love thinking about evil written the other way around, that it prevents us from living.
Yeah.
Right. And when the myth isn't real, and we tend to entertain ourselves with all these details, and we watch it over and over like a good series, and we're like, oh wow, really? And we start believing that we become our own entertainment, and we get stuck in the not the hero or the heroine, but the one who is trying to overcome, the one who is mired in self-pity and worry.
And the drama of that.
And the drama. Yeah. And this is a good place where we want to look to rewriting our stories, especially those stories that keep us feeling like we are still the incapable child who needs someone else to look after us. Because that's when our self-pity and a story becomes a victim. And the victim is a big part of why we tend to hold ourselves back and play out those, end up in that spin cycle in the washing machine.
The victim, I like to think of the victim as the one who keeps buying the ticket to go and see the same horror movie over and over again and wonders how they got there.
And still sits closing their eyes when the scary parts come.
And they take no ownership of the fact that they bought the ticket to get in. We keep revisiting, poking the wound, the sore, the pain, and it becomes an entertainment in a way, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it still hurts. Oh, it still hurts. Oh, it still hurts.
Well, often that pain is more comfortable than what may come if we choose to change it.
Right.
Yeah. So we look here to the block, and this is where we find guilt. And as you were saying, it's where we don't want to take responsibility. And we hold ourselves in allowing the worry and the impositions from others to keep us stuck in the story and in the entertainment of it.
Guilt is a waste of energy. We carry guilt as a way of thinking we feel sorry or remorseful for something that happened. The fact remains it happened. It's in the past. We can't change it. And the concept we carry around about guilt is that, well, if I feel guilty, at least I'm still suffering and being punished for what I did that I don't feel I'm proud of. That's a different way of seeing guilt, right? Everything that we feel that we are culpable for, even if we really have no blame at all, we still carry it around. We make so many assumptions because we create those stories, those mythologies, based on our perception of reality. If we go back to that southeast, if I'm feeling low in myself, the way I'm going to see the world is as a scary place. I'm going to carry my fear. And then my mythologies of the past, all the hurts, all the wrongdoings, all my mistakes are going to make me feel like I am a victim And my guilt for all those wrongdoings is going to keep that victim in place. Like putting cement boots on and getting thrown into the bottom of the lake. We keep feeling like we're drowning in it. Yeah.
And you're talking a lot about the feeling there, because guilt is in the place here of the South where our emotions and our hearts sit. So it tends to weigh really heavily in our hearts. And what happens then is we are at the effect of our emotions. And if I'm carrying guilt, I'm going to be far more susceptible to anybody or anything in my world that may trigger that guilt. So I end up in reactiveness, right? So we look to the warrior's attribute here of balance and control. And this speaks to that willingness to acknowledge what it is that we're feeling. Because guilt is also caught up when we take on other people's feelings as well as our own, or we don't even accept or acknowledge or give credibility to how we're feeling. It's sometimes so often I hear people saying, "Oh, I don't want to feel stupid. This is a stupid thing to feel," and it's not true. If I'm feeling something, I have to be willing to have enough balance inside of me to acknowledge that I'm feeling what I'm feeling. And in that acknowledgement helps me to find my way through it. Instead of holding on to it, it's like holding on to or keeping a body of water without any movement. It becomes septic and toxic. And the same thing happens inside of us. If we don't let these emotions flow, we become out of balance or out of control. We become emotional. We become uncontrollable. And I know that if I've been holding on to an emotion, there is going to come a moment when I cannot hold that anymore, and it's going to pop out. And it's not usually going to look very pretty.
Another way that I see that how we use guilt against ourselves is the guilt we feel for having an emotion. If we feel angry, upset, irate, we'll feel guilty because we want to throw it at the person that we feel is triggering the emotion, right?
Yes.
If we feel happy or joy, we feel guilty, especially if we're around others that aren't happy.
Absolutely.
So it's like we're damned if we do and damned if we don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So paying attention to those places where you find yourself carrying guilt is going to direct you to the heart of the matter. And here it is that you're going to want to learn how to be able to let your emotions and your heart space flow like the sacred waters, which is the element that we find here in the South. Let's move on to the Southwest. And in last week's episode of Learning to Fly, we were teaching you about the 20 count, or maybe it was the week before that. But we were talking about this place of the Southwest as the place of the dream. And in our Star Maiden Circle, this is where we find symbols and the process of life experience. And I always find it fascinating. We use a lot of words and concepts in our communication and our engagement with one another, with life, and even with ourselves. And yet our subconscious mind, the place where the biggest part of our consciousness resides, is actually uses the language of metaphor, of image, of archetypes, of symbols. And so this is the place where we look at our relationship to symbols of life and the information or the definitions or the understanding that we give to particular symbols.
Right. Just look at the explosion across social media with emojis.
Right.
What are those?
Emojis.
Those are symbols.
Right.
They're metaphors. They're representing an emotion, an idea, a thought, a feeling. What are they representing?
Mhm. And how misunderstood emojis can be. Because I don't often understand many of the emojis that I receive.
I agree.
I know many people use the two little hands coming together as a prayer, and somebody recently said to me that it actually means like hands together saying, yeah, let's do this kind of thing.
There we go.
And how misunderstood that is.
But that is a very important thing to take note of. How I interpret a symbol is unique to me.
Yes.
Therefore, how I understand reality in its symbolic form is going to be unique to me.
Mm-hmm.
We can both look at the image of, let's say, a snake on the screen, and one of us might say, ooh, what a horrible, ugly beast. And another person will look at it and say, oh, I love snakes. I think they're really cool animals.
Mm.
And we'll have endless other versions of how somebody would see that.
Many perceptions of reality.
Yeah.
And if we continue using that example of the snake that you've posed, depending on our relationship with that symbol, is going to inform how it is that we are willing to be present in the process of that life experience.
Absolutely.
So if I have a fear of snakes and I see that image, it's more likely to shut me down from that experience rather than open me up to allowing whatever the possibilities are that I can learn about from the many gifts that that symbol may bring.
Yes, that's true. We close doors, we close opportunities, we avoid, we say no more often than we say yes when we interpret the symbols out of fear.
Yes.
Right?
So this is a valuable place to look at when you feel like you're getting stuck and that there are no opportunities and you feel like the doors are all shut. What symbols are you looking at, or what symbols are presenting themselves in your life that may be holding you back?
Another pitfall here, or a little trap we can fall into, is out of the frustration of not understanding what the symbol means, what do we often do? We go and seek advice from others. We go and do all kinds of searching on the internet and dream analysis, symbology analysis. Oh my God, we start thinking that every little thing that happens has a meaning. You know, oh, what does that mean? I looked at the clock and it was 11:11. What does that mean? Right? And it just becomes this overblown distraction that once again affects our life experience. We get caught up in the making the symbols more than they actually are, or diminishing them. We don't want to look at them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to the block to our maturity here of blame, because blame is what we give our power away to through that symbol.
Yeah.
So if you've informed me about a symbol in my dream and I don't like it, it's far easier to make it your fault than it is to take responsibility for myself. Or if I'm in a closed symbol in my experience of life and it's holding me back, it's far easier to make that the problem than to take authority for my life and to be able to open that closed symbol and look behind the door. I can't help but think of that kiddies movie Monsters and how frightening opening the door was, and how the whole story is about the monsters trying to get the scream and the fear out of the children, as opposed to at the end where they start learning that it's more about the laughter, to open the door and see that the fear that we carry doesn't need to be blamed to close us down. Instead, it can be an opportunity to open the doors of opportunity so that we can be present in life.
Yes, we blame whatever it is that we're afraid of. We'll also blame ourselves for not being brave enough to face it.
Yes.
So we can shut down here. And in shutting down, we then start blaming life for all the opportunities we didn't say yes to. We don't take ownership of that. We blame circumstances. We blame others. Oh, I was going to go and do that, but so-and-so needed this, so I had to go and do that, and I passed up the opportunity. It makes for a very miserable life.
Absolutely. So we're going to call on the warrior's attribute here in the southwest, and this is space and distance. Well, if my nose is right up in my story and the symbol that I have in my face is so fearful that I can't actually see it, I'm never going to be able to step back, take a breath, and be able to give myself the distance I need to be able to see it for what it really is.
Mm-hmm. Very true. I was just having a conversation with somebody who is afraid to venture down into a valley along this road that needs a 4x4. And having traveled that road myself, I know that it's quite a safe road to travel on. However, one time, traveled on it, was very wet and slippery and muddy, and it felt very treacherous. And someone relayed that story, who was there with me, relayed that story to this person, and now they're terrified. They've never seen the road. They've never been to this place. They've never even traveled down any kind of road in that kind of condition before. And yet they're still creating this whole fear about this situation they haven't even done yet. This huge closed symbol, and the blaming the other person's story for the fear. The other thing that I said to them was, well, you don't have any space for any other way of seeing this. And that helped the person to realize, oh, let's step back a bit to see what the fear was really about.
Yes, and that's often what happens when we come up against a symbol that brings about fear, because if we go back to the southeast there, no matter where around the wheel we sit, if we are sitting in a place where something is coming up that brings fear, all the other directions are likely to shut down as well. Mm-hmm. And in that fear, it's very difficult to be able to give ourselves the space to see it for what it is. And so as you're relaying in the story, only one perspective shuts us down.
Mm-hmm.
And
that is a common theme in every direction that we will go around. Because as we identified in the very beginning of this program, underneath it all is awareness. And everything we're talking about here, all these teachings and wheels and words, are all teaching us about developing heightened awareness.
Okay, let's move to the west of the wheel. And here we know already from previous episodes of Learning to Fly that the West is the place of our physical body. The West is the place of the material world. And this is where we look to getting our needs met. It's where we choose to, or it's how we choose to get up every day and what we choose to do with our day. Do we have a 9-to-5 job or maybe a 7-to-6 job? Do we have the freedom to do what we want to do in our lives? And so the daydream here in the West is really speaking to the way in which we choose to dream our day in, which can be in the dark when we get caught up in thinking that those material needs are the most important needs of all to be met. And so we spend all our efforts and our energy doing whatever we need to do to accumulate. What kind of car we drive, what kind of home we live in, and what we, it's that old saying about keeping up with the Joneses, even if the Joneses are just a concept inside of our mind. And so what kind of a daydream are you living?
Another way to see the daydream is the way society expects us to live. The socially approved standard of living is a daydream. It's a reality we can never match up to. It's impossible for us to live our lives according to someone else's set of standards. Therefore, it is just a daydream. It's a fallacy that we're living up to. The structure of society and civilization as we know it today is just a construct. Look at what's happened right now through COVID, that we are living under an oppressive way of being treated by our governments. I understand the government's position as well, which their job is to protect the people. And if they feel there's a threat, their job is to ensure that threat is minimized or even eliminated. And therefore, they will take the measures they need to in order to ensure they can do their job. And yet, at the same time, we have been told that we are free. We have been told that we have the right to conduct our lives according to our own choices, and yet we can't. Right now, there are various degrees of lockdown all over the world right now. Here, for example, it's now past curfew, I believe, or almost at curfew, which is a restriction of our freedom. Right?
And one of the things I've come to realize in many of the people who we've been seeing through this COVID time is how much they've come to realize that what they were putting their efforts and their energy into every day isn't really in alignment with their soul's desire or their heart's desire. And the other part of that, what we've created through our current social expectations is unnatural. It's taken us very far out of that way of living as communities. And that's one of the beautiful things I think that has been happening in certain circles through this lockdown time, is people are starting to come back to more of their roots. They're starting to make accurate assessments for themselves about where it is that they put their time and their energy. Because if I'm plugging most of my energy into a dream that doesn't really actually fit my true heart's desire of a dream, and I'm just caught up in the running of the mill, the getting to the end of my education, meeting the right person, getting married, having 2.5 kids with a white picket fence and the dog and the cat and all the things that we think we're expected to do without even thinking about it. And that depletes our energy, makes us feel weak and exhausted. And it's no wonder that we're living in a society today that is so filled with physical illnesses and diseases that come from the misalignment of energy here in the dream.
And it does set up doubt, because we feel like even though we are living up to these standards or doing our best to meet those needs, we doubt it's doing what it's supposed to be doing for our lives. I remember having this awareness quite a long time ago, where I would get excited if I was planning to go and buy, let's say, a new piece of electronic equipment. When I was in my late teens, and I really was into music. And yeah, it was great when I had it in my hands for the first time and played it a little bit. And then eventually it just became something else that was my property, but I really didn't have the same relationship with it. It didn't satisfy the need that I was really looking for.
I can see how internally, how much doubt that can create about what is truly going to satisfy my needs. Because that's the other piece here in the West, is those survival needs, and how beyond the survival needs of food and water and shelter and clothing, what do we want to do with our everyday life that's going to support us, as opposed to accumulation of materialistic wealth and objects that we then need to invest in protecting and
And if doubt is the block, then how many people actually know what they really need, especially when it doesn't match up to what everyone else needs?
Absolutely.
You walk into a situation where everybody is participating in something, and it's just you're just not really into it, or you're just not so interested in doing that, and you do it anyway just to fit in. Instead of trusting what you know, you doubt it. you think there's something wrong with you. You know, well, I don't know what's wrong with me. Why can't I be like everyone else? Well, no one is like you. No one is like me. No one is like you. Therefore, the doubt is just another block from having that awareness of our needs. What is it that is going to nurture you? What is it that's going to sustain you? And when I say sustain, I'm not talking about barely surviving, uplifting you. What is it that's going to make you want to get up in the morning and get on with your day and do something that's interesting, something you enjoy doing, hopefully something you like doing, and even more so, something you love doing.
Because as we've already said, when we're caught in the daydream and doubt is a really comfortable companion, we end up feeling really weak and powerless. Yeah. And yet that is the warrior's attribute that we want to stalk out here, is if we can choose to do things that truly support and feed us, we feel inside of us more powerful, stronger. You know, a good way of doing that is always connecting with nature and finding the time, making the time actually, to go and spend time in nature and to sit with the waters and to sit with your feet in the earth and to feel the trees and the plants around you and to breathe in the fresh air. And that helps to clear out all the muck of what you think you should be creating in your dream so that you can truly have the power to create what you desire.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a story of a guy I know from back when I started my training. He was he worked at a cemetery as a grave digger.
Yes.
And when he reached 50, or as he was about to reach 50, he was talking a lot about when he hit 50, he was going to quit his job and he was going to go and explore what he wanted to do with his life. And he felt very empowered, or he spoke in a very empowered way about it. And I saw him a few years later and found out that he was still digging graves and looking more weary, looking more drawn and tired and old in his face. And I understood that he made the choice to not go there and test and challenge himself, because my suspicion is the doubt crept in and started to undermine and erode at what he really needed, which was that freedom, that flying. Yes. And by the time his goal arrived, like turning 50, he was still there.
It came and went, and not much change happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does take courage to make those changes, especially in the kind of world we live in today, where so much emphasis is placed on prosperity and abundance through money and through things. And so it does take a tremendous leap of faith to step beyond the doubt and to be willing to spread those wings and fly. And as we spread our wings and fly, we fly into the northwest here, where we find the energy of the sacred image and rules and laws. Well, rules and laws are things, as you were saying earlier, that we tend to know well and are usually imposed upon us by external forces. But when we look at these rules and laws here in the northwest, it begs the question of the kinds of rules and laws that we place upon ourselves. You know, the tiny little patterns of behavior about how you do what you do. I know often having a beautiful meal, and I'll leave the best for last. And there's this little rule in my head that tells me that I'm going to leave that for the last because that's the best part. I'm going to eat all the other stuff first. And so often I get to the end of it and I'm so full I can't even enjoy that last piece. And this is a place where those little rules that I create inside of myself really tend to hold me back. And they may seem so subtle, but with awareness and uncovering them, it's amazing how much impact they tend to have in how we do what we do in life.
And how we do what we do in life impacts that sacred image. Our sacred image is us in our purest form, in that unblemished, unarmored, unsculpted self that we spoke about last week. Yes. That we are a perfect being just the way we are, because we can never be duplicated. We are so unique that it was a once-off creation. And once we were stamped with the mold, they broke the mold. So the universe is littered with broken molds across eons.
Absolutely.
The rules and laws that we live by govern and direct our course of life. They can be guidelines where they don't impede on the sacredness or the right of the human being to have their own right to make their own choice. We each have the right to make our own choice of what it is that is best for us. Unfortunately, if we are immersed way back in the Southeast in fear, and we wind our way up to this point, out of fear, we're going to become desperate. We're going to feel like we have to fight tooth and nail to survive. And we're not so concerned about how we affect or impact others, nor are we interested in the sacredness of anything else, right?
In fact, it's very hard to see our own
sacredness. And rules and laws that are open-ended as guidelines aren't going to work either. Therefore, our ability to live by rules and laws can become that restriction that we feel is necessary to keep not just ourselves, but everyone else under control. Right. You could say it's a security blanket.
Which opens the door to this block, to the maturity that sits here, is the insecurity. And we know that when we're feeling insecure, we're going to put up fences and rules and laws about how it is that we can govern our environment in order to feel safe.
And the imposition of those laws, the penalties levied, can even be to the point of dismemberment, like cutting off a hand for stealing, taking the life of a human being for having taken the life of another human being. So we have some very severe laws and punishments that, once again, is because we're unable to find that sacredness of who we really are, no, let alone each other.
Yes.
And if I don't see myself as sacred, I'm certainly not going to see you as sacred. And if I don't see you as sacred, then you're going to probably be something closer to the opposite, which makes you a threat and pushes my insecurity button.
Right. Which means that I'm going to step into keeping myself safe in whatever means I feel.
And wrap myself up with those security measures that I think are going to keep me safe.
Right. Yes. And as always, we go into a lot more depth and detail with these teachings within our Rainbow Warrior training program. But for time, we're going to have to keep going here. So we look to the warrior's attributes of pattern and timing. And how does this help us to be able to overcome that block to insecurity?
Well, a pattern is something that repeats, something that is easily identifiable and easy to follow. You think of a simple dance like the box step, very simple pattern of stepping. once you learn it and know the timing, you can
relax
into it, right? So patterns are useful, but patterns are also the ones that we create to keep ourselves secure and safe.
Yes, in those rules and laws.
Right. Those restrictions, instead of the guidelines, the fixed rules, the severity of it is a direct reflection or directly proportional to the severity of our insecurity.
And we miss the timing because we're so busy trying to control everything that we can't see a new pattern just step into that dance and move in the timing that the pattern is working with. We're trying to control it, and so we become inflexible and challenged. All right, let's keep moving on, and we move up here to the north where we find philosophy, meaning, and purpose. My goodness, this is a big one, because so often I hear people coming to us and they're desperately seeking what their meaning and purpose to life is. And often it is defined by what they believe gives them value, or what they've been taught or taken on from their image makers and their role models about what it means to be valued in the world. More often than not, wanting to be of service to others as opposed to being of service to themselves.
Because this is the place of the mind, and we perceive our reality through the filter of our mind. It's like our go-to. It's the place where we spend the most time, is in our minds. And because of that, we trust it the most. The heart also has neural cells. The heart is a feeling mind, not a thinking mind. And we don't give the heart as much credit and as much attention in how it thinks through feeling about what we create as our philosophy, or how we define our meaning and purpose. Oftentimes, something sounds good, it sounds right, and we adopt it as our own, and we become believers. The moment that happens, we have no other space for any other way of seeing. And this is how we can get stuck here.
And locked into one singular point of view.
I have to say, one of the most frustrating experiences I know is to have a conversation with someone who has the answer to everything and is unwilling to let you share your ideas. They've always it's as if they undermine everything you say. Very frustrating to be around someone like that, which is, we can identify as a full cup. When you fill the cup to the brim, there is no more space for anything else to go in there until you remove it. Our mind needs to be treated in that way. We always need to be emptying the mind so that we can have the space to take in more knowledge, more information, to help us assess what we're going to do.
Right.
Yes.
Never holding on to anything.
No.
Yes. Let's look at the block here. And this is where we find the block of shame, which is usually when we don't feel like we're fitting in and we don't live up to that meaning and purpose, or we have so many ideas and beliefs that we hide behind what we think and feel. You were talking about the person with the full cup. They're usually hiding because if they think that they know everything, they are hiding what they don't know.
It's true. And shame is also a very painful experience, to feel shame, because shame implies that there's something wrong with us. We're defective, we're broken, we're a factory second, a reject.
Right.
Somewhere God, the creator, great spirit, made a mistake with me. Everyone else is fine. But me, I'm really badly broken. Well, right away, you can hear that there is a philosophy there, and there is no really positive meaning and purpose if someone believes that about themselves. And it is all about beliefs. We believe in shame. Shame is not a natural experience. It's something that is imposed. We don't naturally feel ashamed unless someone points it out and says, don't you see that you've done this? You should be embarrassed of yourself.
Don't do that in front of other people.
Right.
You know, and
shame on you.
Right. And the other thing I find with shame is how challenging it can be for us to identify it inside of ourselves, because we hide it behind so many things to project or present that acceptable human being that we want to be.
Right.
It speaks a lot to the teaching from last week on identity and how we mold and sculpt ourselves into the world.
The other thing that shame does is it inhibits free thought. I don't dare speak my mind for fear that I'm going to embarrass myself.
Or be rejected.
Yeah, I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth.
Right. So we stalk the warrior's attribute of intent and coordination here. And this is speaks to what you were sharing a few minutes ago about emptying that cup. If I am full of what I think I know and what I think I need to be in order to be meaningful and have purpose, then I am not going to be very clear on the intent of my desire, the intent of my action. So here in intention or intent, it is the most valuable thing for us to be able to empty our cups and be willing to let go of even the deepest seated beliefs that we carry inside of us.
Intent here goes in support of meaning and purpose. Because if we can't find a meaning or a purpose for something, it's very difficult to put any attention on it or to even design any kind of an intent to move forward. Right? So an intent speaks about something we seek to gain, something we seek to learn about. We love to learn. We love to explore. We love to discover new things. This planet is still being discovered. Even after all of these discoveries that humans have made, there are still so many things yet to be discovered. And it is because of that desire that we create intents. If I'm full of what I think I know, the kind of intent I'm going to make isn't going to be very clear, as you said. And I'm going to fumble through because I'm not going to be very receptive to learning how to do it. I already think I know.
And little ability to coordinate what you really need to manifest that intent.
Yes, absolutely true.
Let's move to the northeast. And this northeast is the place where we find design and choreography of energy. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How much energy do you want to invest in doing what you want to do? These are the kinds of questions in this direction of the wheel that we look at asking ourselves. Because in choosing how we're going to create and design and choreograph the things we want to manifest, we need to have a sober mind. This is a place where we make choices and decisions on how much energy we want to invest in something, or how little energy we need to invest. You know, we tend to err on the side of as little energy investment as possible for the greatest reward that we can possibly milk it for.
And sometimes we do it the opposite way, where we rev our engine to exhaustion. We burn the candle at both ends, you know, or we invest our energy in things that really don't bring us much value.
Good distractions.
Yes, yes, exactly. The many distractions of life that can lead us astray from what we really want to achieve in our lives.
So it's valuable here to have a consistent assessment of our priorities. You know, that because those distractions tend to take us away from what's truly valuable and what's truly going to feed us and what's truly going to bring us that which we desire to thrive, to fly.
Yes. Now that distraction is most often dominated by our lower self, our Shida. That incessant chatter that buzzes between our ears, creating the resistance, creating that fear in us that makes us want to dig in our heels because we're afraid we're not going to survive again.
Right. And what you're talking about there is the block here that we find, that resistance.
Yes. And it is the resistance. The resistance is the battle that we were talking about earlier. It is the battle between the part of ourselves that wants to keep evolving, growing, shifting, changing, learning, expanding. That's the Hokshida, the higher self, versus the part that wants to stay safe, comfortable, unchanging, because we don't like the unknown. The unknown scares us. And that is the lower self, the Shida.
I know that this is the place where when we are in resistance and we're putting more energy in than we need to, we tend to stress. So stress is running rife in our societies right now, and it's directly related to the inability that we have to design the energy in the way in which we need to. And often because we live in a society that celebrates things like workaholism and the success that comes along with putting a lot of time and effort into things, which has its value, but it also seems to be counterproductive. The warrior's attribute here that we want to stalk seems to be in contravention to the very things that we're taught about having to work hard to do what we need to make ends meet. This is where we find relaxation and focus.
I like thinking here of the martial arts tradition and how it teaches us about relaxation and focus. That if we can stay relaxed, we can channel our energy, focus it on the target with the greatest effect, which is what you were talking about earlier, that giving only what we need to give in order to get the greatest return. Min-max, minimum effort for maximum efficiency. It's not possible to achieve that if we're not relaxed and focused. If you are target shooting, for example, and you want to hit the bullseye, if you're tense, you're going to miss it every time.
And you're going to bring harm to yourself with the recoil.
Maybe. Right? That's very possible, yes. But the point is that a true marksman knows to slow down their breathing, to relax, to focus, and then squeeze the trigger gently. There's nothing about hard, fast, forced.
Getting it done. Yes.
None of that.
Which I find is such a contrary thing to how we, more often than not, are brought up to believe about putting more effort and energy into it than we need to.
Right. And the place where I see this happens a lot in people is when they make something an enemy. That there's a challenge in our life that We don't know how to get around. We don't know how to figure it out. We're trying, but it just keeps, we keep failing miserably. And therefore, we resist even going there. And we get caught up in the stress of life. It's as if we feel like we're trapped in a life that we can't control. We're not designing and choreographing our life anymore. We feel like we're always the prey rather than the predator.
Right. That life is running us instead of us running life.
And oftentimes there's no space for relaxation because we're always in a battle. And as I said earlier, it is that fundamental battle between our desire to grow and our fear of growing.
Right. So let's move to the final direction here, and this is in the East where we find fantasy and illusion. Oh, all the false realities that we tend to believe in, the ways in which we baffle ourselves with our own bullshit, all the fun things that we love to see. This is where we are unable to see ourselves for who we truly are. It is the place of the East, the place of grandfather sun, the place of the fire, the place where the sun rises in the morning, for us to be able to look at ourselves and see who we truly are. And when we don't feel worthy and we're sitting in those low sense of self, those low concepts of self, it's very much easier to just create an illusion that makes us feel comfortable and safe.
Fantasy does have a value because it is through fantasy that we can see beyond the limitations of and restrictions of the world that we're bound to. Absolutely. It was a fantasy initially to imagine a human being could fly. And now we're flying all over the world, right? In airplanes.
Yes.
So there is a value to that. It's illusion that can be the trap. When we believe in the fantasy more than we believe in our true reality, then we live in illusion. We live in a world that is full of traps and mirrors and smoke, and there's nothing substantial for us to gain there.
And we create these castles in the sky. You know, we speak big things and we don't have enough energy to follow through and actually create them in the way we desire. So when we're caught in that, we tend to move into that energy of repression where we hold ourselves back, or we just leave it in the mind and let ourselves wander in that fantasy world up there in the sky.
It is that ability to walk one's talk. Right? Are you all talk, or can you actually walk the talk? This is what we have to ask ourselves here. We can fantasize about what we desire. We can fool ourselves into believing we already have it. But the fact remains that if we can't walk the talk, it's just an illusion. And therefore it becomes easy to repress what we really want, what we really hunger for. This is the place of the element of fire and spirit, our spirit. Our spirit is like a fire that wants to expand and keep growing. When a fire comes alive, its only goal is to keep consuming what it touches next. Well, we too, if we can live that way, imagine what life could be like if every moment is something new to consume, something new to experience, something
to feast upon.
Yes. That is the kind of life our spirit is beckoning us to experience. But if we're repressed because we don't know how to get past the illusion, we're never going to get there.
And the illusion can also feel like it's so far beyond us that that we are incapable of creating that. And that's another way in which we tend to hold ourselves back through the repression, is we just don't believe that we have what it takes.
And it circles back to fear, because it's always that fear that supports all the other blocks.
Right.
It is our fear of survival that triggers the need to repress our spirit or to resist using our energy effectively, or the shame of what we believe and think, or the insecurity of feeling safe in the world. We can go on and on through the blocks, but what I'm saying is that it's always fear that triggers those other blocks.
Absolutely. And you were already talking about the warrior's attributes here, about where the east is the place of fire and our spirit. If we can overcome that repression of holding ourselves back, if we can start putting our money where our mouth is and walking our talk, there is no end to that self-growth and speed. We truly do become like the fire, and we become ravenous for new experiences, new understandings, new learning, new exploration. And that is probably one of the reasons why you're sitting here listening to these teachings, is your desire to grow and to move with speed through your shift of evolution and change. And so we bring this teaching to its completion yet again, as we have completed now the Star Maiden Circle. We bring it to completion with a personal ceremony. And this uses the breathing technique that we began this episode with earlier, that breathing in to the count of 4, holding it inside of you to the count of 4, breathing out to the count of 4, and then pausing in the emptiness again for another count of 4. This is what we call the determined breathing technique. And so this is a breathing technique that you can play with and explore in your own way. There are so many variations of how it is that you can use this. But in this daily practice, we're encouraging you to deepen your understanding of your own cycles and patterns and behaviors that we've been identifying in this teaching of the Star Maiden Circle tonight. And one of the ways in which you can do it is to find a time, a daily discipline, where you can do it at the same time every day. And you can give yourself a few minutes where you can take each direction and spend the day just walking that direction out into your day. And also inviting that direction, those words of that direction, to become your teacher and to help you to start identifying some of the ways in which you hold yourself back, some of the ways in which you keep yourself stuck within that prison of your own immaturity, and also how you can open the door to stalking that warrior's attributes. We've also included 3 self-assessment questions here, which are very valuable to be asking yourself about each direction. What am I open to? What am I resistant to? And what is it that I can change? And so we have loved spending another time with you, and we hope that we open the door for you to start changing those patterns of behavior so that you can truly spread your wings and fly. Aho.
Oh.